All right, welcome to Property Rights in the Constitution. This is number 8 in the lecture series in the Constitution. And we're going to talk today, obviously, about property rights. I want to start out with some thoughts about that. When you think about how America was started, when the people from Plymouth Rock first came over, right? The Pilgrims, when they first came over, what did they say? They said, we're good Christian people, we can trust each other. Let's set up a communal system. Let's work together and everyone will work hard and everyone will get the rewards of those labors. What happened? The first couple winters, the first couple years there, they almost starved because they lived in a communistic society. They trusted each other. Oh, well, we'll all be fine. Okay. Eventually, William Bradford said, "Look, this isn't even really a decision. We have to do this. We're going to give every person their parcel of land and say, you either produce or you die. Your survival is based on whether you take care of your own food and feed your own family." And what happened? Almost immediately, things changed. And they started to be very productive, even to the point where within just a few seasons, they were having the Thanksgiving feast, right? All kinds of plenty. Because before, in communism or a communal society where everyone's property belonged to everyone, people said, "Man, my ankle kind of hurts today. I'm not going to go out to work. I'm sure it's all right. Oh, I've got to do some washing today, so I'm not going to go out." But when it was put on them, and they said, "It's now my responsibility to feed myself," they said, "I don't care if my ankle hurts. I need to go out and work. I don't care if I'm washing. I'll do that later, but I've got to work while the sun's shining." Okay? And so there's some basic ideas there that teach that communal living, property communism doesn't work. Okay? Think look at two commandments of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal. That's based on what? The idea of private property, because you can't steal something if it doesn't belong to someone else. Thou shalt not covet, the same idea. Okay, so it's these basic ideas that are entwined in just some common sense foundational truths. And we're going to look into property rights and see what the Constitution has to say about property rights. Okay, so let's start out with John Locke. John Locke, in a lot of ways, is the founder's founder, okay? The founders looked to many people. John Locke was one of them, especially in these types of natural laws, natural rights. He says this: "The great and chief end, therefore, of men's uniting and putting themselves under government is," and how would you fill in that blank? Why do people unite in government? He says it is to preserve their property. That's why they unite, is to preserve their property. Okay, so theft, fraud, breach of contract, trespassing, confiscation, destruction of property, that's all deterred with the legitimate functions of the government. Okay, and that's why people join into government. He goes on, George Washington says this: "Private property and freedom are inseparable." Are you really free if you don't have private property? No. Okay, he who controls the property controls the means of production, and the means of production are the means by which you survive and live. If you don't have private property, you're dependent upon somebody else. Okay, along that same vein, John Adams says, "Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist." Okay, if your property can be taken from you at any point, you're not free because you're dependent upon the control of other people, and they control that property. Okay, so kind of some basic foundational quotes from the founders and even predating the founders. Now let's look at, we've talked about the Declaration and the principles of the Declaration over and over in these presentations, but I want to get this idea firm in our minds. It's very, very important as we talk later about property rights, this idea of where our rights come from, etc., etc. Okay, in the Declaration it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Okay, we've already talked about this. Who gives us our rights? God does. Okay? And we have the right, the inalienable right, to do what we want to with our life and our liberty and our property, as long as we don't infringe on the life, liberty, and property of someone else. Okay? Now, that's what freedom's all about. Freedom to do and become, achieve whatever you want to do with your private property. Now, the next sentence says this: "That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men." So very clearly, what is the role of government? The role of government is to secure our rights, or, if you use the 2 P words we talked about in the first presentation, is it to protect or to provide? Okay? Their job is not to provide or to plan. Their job is to protect. Okay? Their job is to protect our rights. Now, if we are protected in our rights, then guess what? We're the ones who get to plan and provide for our future by the use of our life, our liberty, and our property, because they're protecting, that's their job. But when government says, "No, we're going to plan for you, and we're going to provide for you," that's not the proper role. Okay? We're in charge of planning and providing with the help of God. Okay? Now, George Washington makes a pretty simple statement here. He says, government is not reason, it's not eloquence, government is force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. When you apply that to what we just learned about in the Declaration, the only legitimate use of force or government, because they're synonymous, they're the same thing, the only legitimate use of force is to protect our rights. That's it. That's the only time force should be used. Okay? That goes along with this last part of the Declaration that says, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Government only has just powers in these two cases. Okay, some people say this is one-pronged. As long as we consent, the government can do whatever we want them to do. But it's two-pronged. You first have to have the power, and then you have to consent to give it to the government. If I don't have the power as an individual to use force in a situation, then I can't give the government the power to use force in that situation, because it's bottom-up government. We talked about these principles before, right? It's bottom-up. I'm endowed with the right, and I delegate to government the power and authority that's associated with that right to employ force in that endeavor. And that should be a protective function to protect my life, my liberty, and my property. Otherwise, it's outside the scope of what government should do, because it's doing something unnatural, something I can't do, and therefore I can't give to them something, a power that I myself don't have. Okay? Now, that's just a review. You may say, well, that's great, and what does this have to do with private property? It has everything to do with private property, and we're going to get into it here in a little while. I like how Frédéric Bastiat, he's one of my heroes. He's a great writer, great thinker. He says this: it seems to me that the rights of the state can be nothing but the regularizing of pre-existent personal rights. For my part, I cannot conceive a collective right that does not have its foundation in an individual right. Okay? Hence, to know whether the state is legitimately invested with a right, we must ask whether the individual has that right in virtue of his nature and in the absence of all government. In other words, do I have the right, this is what we said earlier, right? This is the Declaration of Independence is saying. Do I have the right individually? If I do, then there can be a collective right that's based around that government can do as well. Now, do nations, states, communities, do they have rights? They don't. Only individuals have rights. He goes on to explain this a little bit more. He says, if every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. Thus, the principle of collective right, its reason for existing, its lawfulness, is based on individual right. Okay? If I have a right, I delegate the power and authority. I don't delegate the right, I delegate the power and authority. And there's a collective power there to do what I on my own could do. Okay, so I'm repeating myself over and over, but I think it's important to say the Declaration says this, Frédéric Bastiat says this, logic itself says this. It's important to understand as a basic foundational principle when we start to talk about a little more sticky issues when it comes to property. Okay? Okay, so the Fifth Amendment, this is where we start out. We've talked about some of the founders' ideas. Let's focus on what the Constitution now has to say about property. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay? We're going to get to the definition. Let's talk about property. What's property? James Madison says this: property in its particular application means that dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in exclusion of every other individual. So property has this implication of private property, in exclusion of every other individual. It's mine. I act on it. It's mine. No one else does because it's private. I'm the owner of it. Okay? In its larger and juster meaning, property embraces everything to which a man may attach a value and have a right, and which leaves to everyone else the like advantage. See, and everyone else has the same like advantage. I'm not the only one who gets to have private property. Everyone can have private property. But in its bigger meaning, property embraces everything to which a man may attach value. So, your religious belief, your opinions, your land, your merchandise, your money, is that property? Those are all property. A lot of times we think of property, and we'll focus a lot in this presentation on land, but land isn't the only form of property. Even your ideas and your thoughts and your beliefs are property. And you have a right in your property, don't you? Okay? Now, speaking of attaching a value to something, as Madison just talked about, as discussed in my economics presentation, people need to know that their property, their discoveries, their ideas, their whatever it may be, will be secure, and that people won't steal that from them, they won't take from them their liberty. And so that's why you have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 that says the Copyrights and Patents Clause, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. People have a right to their property, not just real property, not just land, but also their Just like Madison talked about, anything they attach value to, which may be inventions or ideas. That's why you have patents and copyrights. That's a proper role of government to protect that property. So let's get back in. That was just kind of a definition about property. Let's get back into the Fifth Amendment. We're going to dissect this a little bit. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, so let's focus on this idea of deprivation of property. And let's use land as an example. Okay, we'll start to focus and say property is land, even though it's not necessarily that narrow, it's more broad. But let's say property is land for right now. So your deed, your ownership of the land, okay, is that the only value that you have in the land? Is it just the ownership? A lot of times I think, well, as long as I have the land, or the deed, and I own it, well then yeah, I own it, don't I? But there's another part that I think is even more important. The other part is the use of your land. Because you could own your land all you wanted. You could have the title and the deed and all that stuff, and it's set. But if the government says you can't use it for the things you want to use it for, then do you really own it? No. Okay? So you can be deprived of your property while maintaining the deed. Government can take that from you. Okay? And that's a challenge, because it could, some people say, well, what's your problem? You have the deed, don't worry about it, it's yours. Well, it's not really mine because I can't do what I want to with it. The use is the more important of the two elements of ownership. Okay, nowadays, how does the government deprive you of your private property rights? Through zoning laws. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong, I need to take a step back. I understand. If you have land today and you bought a property, etc., you've bought it under the understanding that there are zoning laws that come with it. So if you buy a property and you say, hey, I know what the zoning laws are, but when I buy it, I'm going to go ahead and exercise my right to use it as I want to. That's a violation of principle. You're violating the contract you entered into. The contract came with it, the zoning laws. Okay? And so I'm not saying that all zoning laws are bad and you have to negate them, you have to fight them. I'm saying zoning laws in principle are wrong in the first place, because zoning laws restrict the use of your property. And it's your property. You should be able to do what you want to with it. Now, in the world we live in, most land comes as zoning. I understand that. I'm simply just saying on principle where the challenge lies. Okay? And it violates natural law. Now, according to the Fifth Amendment, it says deprived of property without due process of law. Okay? So, in the Fifth Amendment, the only time government should deprive anyone of their right to property is if they've been afforded the due process of law, which finds them guilty of infringing on someone else's rights. That's what law is about in the first place, isn't it? To protect people's life, liberty, and property. So if, because of due process of law, you're found guilty, then yes, they can act on you in the protection of other people's rights. But they can't act on you if you haven't infringed on someone else's rights. That's what the Fifth Amendment says. Deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay? Now, is a private property owner who uses his property as he pleases infringing on his neighbor's God-given rights to the ownership and use of his neighbor's property? No. The neighbor still owns and uses the property as they want to, their own property as they want to, correct? So not infringing. So according to our definition we just talked about, government can't act on the individual. Okay? And just because your neighbor has a house color that you don't like, or keeps his lawn in a way that's buggy to you and it's offensive to you or whatever, you can't use the force of law to infringe on what they can do with their own property. If there's no violation and infringement of someone's rights, government can't act. There's no need for them to act. Okay? Now, here's the big question. What if someone is using their property in such a way that it affects the value of my property? Your next door neighbor just has just a horribly horrendous, ugly color, doesn't ever keep his grass watered, it's brown, it's all kinds of trash all over the place. And does that affect the value of your property? You bet it affects the value of your property. Okay? So what happens is we have to ask ourselves the question, what options do I have as an individual? I have a couple options. My first option is to go and knock on his door and explain the situation and ask for his help and say, hey, look, the way you're keeping your house, you can do what you want to do, but it would really help me and the property value of all the other people around you if you were to keep it up more. Is there anything I can do to help you? And if they say, bug off, I'll do whatever I want to do. What's another option you have? Say, hey, sir, I thought about this. I'd be willing to put $300 or $400 into fixing your sprinkler system or repainting your house or whatever it is that bugs you. You can offer your time and your money to fix it. Okay, so you have those two options, don't you? But is one of your options to say, this guy's not listening. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to start throwing away all his stuff. I'm going to paint his house whatever color I want it to be painted. And I will do that because I want to have a neighbor who keeps his house how I want. Can I do that? Is that an option? That's not an option. Why? Because it's his private property. He has the right to use his property as he wants to. If I had the God-given right to do that, then I could compel his behavior. But do I have a God-given right to have a neighbor who keeps his house and paints his house and keeps his lawn how I want him to? Is that a God-given right? No. I would like it to be, and I have some really strong preferences. So do most average common sense thinking people. But I don't have a God-given right. Therefore, I can't use force upon him to start saying, that's trash, I'll throw it away. That's a bad color, I'm going to repaint it. I can't do that. Is that inconvenient? Yeah, it is inconvenient. It kind of bugs. And does it lower the property value of my property? Yeah, it does. But if I, at an individual level, can't do something, then what? Then I can't delegate to government to do that for me. If I can't use force, right? It'd be a violation of me to go on his property and take his property or fix his property for him. If I can't use force and I'm not willing to use my money and my time to fix it, why would I think that I can have government use force and their time and their money to fix it? It's a violation of principle. Why? Because the Declaration of Independence, remember, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Government only has the power that I as an individual have. Now, some may argue in that Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed, that's embodied in the majority of the people. If the people in that community, the majority, feel a certain way about certain colors on houses, well, then that's where the consent of the governed is embodied. And that would be true if we were a democracy. But we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And a republic means rule of law. And our law is based on individualism, not on collectivism. Collectivist states, communities, counties, they don't have rights. Only individuals have rights. If government force is going to be employed, remember, it's because someone's rights have been violated. Does an ugly fluorescent pink house of my neighbor violate my rights? No. It definitely violates my preferences, and I can't stand it, but it doesn't violate my rights. so government can't be used. Okay? Let's take the example a little bit one step further, okay? Because this is where we really start to get into this. What if your next door neighbor wants to run a pig farm? Now, that's not only going to affect my property value, that's going to affect my lifestyle, isn't it? Okay? Now, first of all, if the pig farm infringes on my health, do I have a legitimate claim on government to use force to stop that from happening? Sure. Yeah. And you can seek redress in a court of law. But the court of law should think through this and understand, if I came into the situation after knowing the pig farm was there and I moved in and said, hey, this is hurting my health, that's my problem. I made the choice to get in there. And so I'm the one who needs to leave. It's not the pig farm's problem. Okay, so let's go back though. If they say, we're just neighbors, and next thing you know, they want to be a pig farmer. I'm like, I don't want that. It doesn't affect my health, but geesh, no one wants that for a next door neighbor, right? How do we resolve this? Well, the issue comes down to, do they have the right to do that? If there aren't any codes or regulation or zoning on that, if it's within the zoning and the property, then you do have to kind of just buck up and deal with it, because it's part of what that land came with, was the ability to use it for a pig farm. You may not like that. You may say, that's not right. I want to get a petition. I want everyone in our neighborhood to say they can't do that. But guess what? They can do that. You can't write a rule after the fact. Okay? What should have happened? If you wanted to make sure you don't have a pig farm next to you, then what you should have done is you should have made sure before you bought land and built a house or bought a house in that area that there were restrictions on that pig farm. Those are called CC&Rs. Those are codes, covenants, and regulations. And people get together and make those decisions together. Okay? And it's negotiated at the private level. Are CC&Rs fine? Yeah, they're totally fine, because private individuals make those choices. If I want to go into a subdivision and make sure something doesn't happen, if I don't want any animals fenced in, I don't want any animals in this community, I can't just go in there and buy the land and then demand it, because it's my preference. I have to know beforehand, and when I negotiate there, that's fine. But if you're in there and you're already living there, and someone puts up a fence and puts a horse in the yard, and that's already permitted with the rules on the land, then you missed your chance. You should have thought about it beforehand. You can't wait till, this is inconvenient for me, now I want to change it. Does that make sense? So to me, there's a big difference between private individuals negotiating a contract. They can do that all day long, and that'll affect the price and value of the land, won't it? But there's a huge difference between the government imposing and using force and saying, you will do this to your property, especially when it's after the fact. That's the problem. Okay? That's a violation of principle. I think something that kind of sums this whole thing, because some of this is tough medicine. It's hard to swallow. I don't want to think that, man, my next door neighbor could run a pig farm and I just have to, swallow it. Oh, geez. Well, that doesn't seem right. Well, yeah, it's because he hadn't thought about the property rights in the first place when he walked into it. Thomas Jefferson said this, and I think this wraps it up. I'd rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than to those attending too small a degree of it. Are there inconveniences when it comes to private property rights when someone doesn't have the same preference as you? Yes. Is it more than just an inconvenience? Can it actually hurt you financially? Yes. But guess what? I'll take that because freedom is what I want. I want freedom. And there may be some inconveniences with too much freedom, but I'd way rather have that than the abuses and the tyranny that comes with too little freedom, right? That's what Jefferson's saying. I think that's a great idea. Okay, I know this is controversial. I know people will say, well, that's not right. And I have rights. I have value in my property. You do. And you need to think through that before you choose to enter into these different contracts and negotiations. Okay? Now, the rest of Article 5, the Amendment 5, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, most people read the end of the Fifth Amendment here and they say, as long as private property can be taken, as long as it's justly compensated. But there's a little more to it, okay? We're going to look into, there's a little bit more than just, well, as long as we justly compensate, government can take the land from them, eminent domain, okay? Let's look at it. What it says here is public use. The property can be taken for public use. Now, does that say public good or public use? And there's a huge difference. Public good is not public use. If public good, we agree as a community, more than 51% of us agree that downtown is blighted and this ugly apartment building needs to be taken out, so that we're going to change codes and make it so they either fix it or we demolish it and let someone else go in there who's going to take care of that property. And that's for the public good. But the qualification, the condition in the Fifth Amendment is not public good, it's public use. There's a huge difference, okay? Now let's look at that apartment building for a second. Would the free market solve that problem? Are there some places in downtown that are blighted and ugly? Yeah, and they're just run down like, man, I wish we could make it nice. It'd sure be nice to have a community we're proud of. Would the natural market fix it? Yes, because in a rundown apartment, what type of people live in there? The people that have a hard time making payments. That may not make payments. And the owner of the apartment will say, gosh, I can't do this anymore. Financially, it's not working out for me. There is no way to make this work out. And so the apartment will implode on itself, right? It won't work. It won't stand. And an owner would have every incentive in the free market to say, you know, I'm going to wipe that out. And I'm going to build an apartment where I can actually make money and not just keep losing it. Okay? Why do these apartments a lot of times continue to stand? So why doesn't the free market solve that issue? Because of government subsidies. What does it do? What does the government do? They pay the apartment owner and make up for the losses they would have had the free market been active and been free to act how it would, where they couldn't make a profit. They couldn't turn a profit on the apartment, but the government says, oh, now you can. We're going to pay you to do this. So what happens if people are looking for apartments who happen to make a pretty decent salary? Hey, I need an apartment. They go to the apartment owner and they say, you can't come here. You make too much. I'm dependent upon the government for my subsidies, not upon the free market where I have freedom and I risk and reward and I might, well, not in this apartment complex. We're tied to the government. They're in charge of this. Okay, that's an economic discussion, but it's interesting. Okay, now what about street front property owners who are forced to give up access to their street front property for a bike path or for a new beautification project of the city? Wait a second, is that public use? A lot of people say, well, it's for the benefit of all, so it's public good. It's public use. I say, no, it's not public use. That's public good. A use is something you need. You need to have. Sometimes they need to put in streets or need to put in a bridge. Okay, that makes sense. But just public good, just a bike path or a beautification project, and you're going to take my private property for that? Not if it's not for public use. Okay. Next part of the Fifth Amendment talks about just compensation. Most people, that's what they leap immediately to this just compensation idea. And just compensation is good. It's a true principle. If we're taking from someone, the community is taking from someone private property, then they need to reimburse them with private property in the form of money to make them whole again. Okay? But it's not just free reign. We'll take whatever we want to and we'll just pay for it. No, there's a public use issue, first of all. Okay, so in review, real quick. Fifth Amendment's pretty robust, in my opinion, talking about property. There's three things. The first thing is due process. Due process of law, okay? No one shall be punished by government unless they have infringed on someone else's rights. And that has been proven in a court of law, and then government can act on them. Due process of law is the first reason that any property should be taken from someone, okay? To take from someone their life, liberty, or property, their restriction, you throw them in jail, or a fine, or whatever that be. That's legitimate if the due process of law. Secondly, we just talked about it, public use, okay? There's two reasons which the government can take property, public use, and the second one is just compensation, okay? So in short, the Fifth Amendment clearly states that private property use and ownership can be taken from an individual by government if such property confiscation is the lawful punishment for that person infringing on someone else's rights, and if such property confiscation is necessary for public use and the confiscated property is paid for by the public who use it. Okay? So I know I just reviewed there, but I think it's important to understand those principles. Three principles in the Fifth Amendment that talk about private property. Okay, now let's go on to contracts, okay? Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 says, no state shall pass any ex post facto law or law impairing the obligation of contracts. When it comes to contracts, it's not the government's role to set the terms of the contract, right? Just like we talked about before. It's the government's role to enforce the terms of the contract. Now, they are not to step in. The wording here says they are not to make any laws that impair the obligation of contracts. Why would it be that it isn't government's role to make the terms of the contract? Because the only legitimate powers government has are the powers that we have and give to them. Can I force someone to enter into a contract unwillingly against their will? No. So why would government be able to force them into the contract? They can't. That violates principle. Okay? Now, on the other hand, can I force someone to abide by the terms of the contract we've already entered into? Yes. So therefore, I can delegate to government to enforce the terms of the contract. They're not supposed to impair the contract. They're supposed to enforce the terms of the contract that I, as a private individual, entered into with somebody else. That's completely legitimate. That's the scope, though, of where they enter into contracts. If you and I are happy with a contract we made, government can't come in and say, you can't do that. You're a third party. You have nothing to do with it. We're both happy with the terms. We don't care if you approve or don't approve. Okay? They can't impair the obligation of contracts. Now, to me, zoning laws, going back to this a little bit, are quite simply laws that impair the obligation of contracts among individuals who own, buy, and sell land. Now, whether intentionally or not, what do zoning laws do? They affect the value of property. And the government ends up choosing winners and losers. They end up evaluating different pieces of land by the rules they make and impose upon those pieces of land. Okay? Now, can you do without zoning laws? Ask Houston, Texas. The whole entire city doesn't have zoning laws. I think they're surviving pretty well. They're doing all right. They're free, right? And if something goes wrong, they have themselves to blame, and they get to make adjustments to it and make those changes because they're free people. And they're not dominated by government's opinion. They're dominated by their own opinion. They get to do what they want to do. Okay? So government-mandated zoning laws create and destroy property value and pick winners and losers in the market. Okay? Rather than relying on a free market, privately owned system that operates based on supply and demand and risk and reward. We turn all that freedom over and say, oh, we don't want supply and demand, risk and reward. We just want the government to tell us what to do. Don't do that. That's not the way to live free and have private property. Okay? Hitting the first part of this, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, no state shall pass any ex post facto law. Now, it is true, when you buy land these days, you buy the zoning that comes with it. But some people would even advocate one step further and say, you not only buy the land and the zoning that comes with it, but you also buy the understanding that that zoning could change at any point in time. I reject that. That is not something I agree with, because that's an ex post facto law. You buy it knowing you can put a horse on it, you go in there to put it on, and next thing you know, the neighbors have got together and said, no, we can't put horses anymore. We restricted that now. Whoa, hold on. That is a violation. That's an ex post facto law. It's an after the fact law. Okay? Okay, moving on to Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, talking about property. So Fifth Amendment is talking about eminent domain and due process, etc. We just talked about the contracts and the role of government in contracts when it comes to private property, the meat, the essence of that contract. Now we're going to talk about property, land that belongs to the United States. And Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 says this: the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. And nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Okay, let's break that down and look at it. First of all, Congress shall have power to make all needful regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Very, very clear. Congress, the federal government, is in charge of the federal territories. Okay? And prior to 1890, in Wyoming's specific case, we were a federal territory, and they made the rules that governed the territory of Wyoming. Okay? But on July 10th, 1890, Congress passed a bill for the Enabling Act to make Wyoming a state, the 44th state in the Union. Okay? And we took our place on equal footing as the other 43 states in the Union, and we became a state. We are no longer a territory, and therefore, Congress no longer had authority to make regulations and be in charge of the state of Wyoming because we're not a territory anymore. We're now a state. Now, the Enabling Act itself says this. It provides that the land shall be held, appropriated, and disposed of exclusively for the purposes herein mentioned as the state legislature may provide. Okay, so it's clear that the land within the state of Wyoming is to be managed by who? The state legislature. Okay, pretty easy. So federal agencies still exist within the state and still claim jurisdiction. They're here only out of ignorance. We've chosen to let them. Okay, ignorance and apathy, and if we were willing to submit to federal tyranny. The federal government has no jurisdiction within the state. It's now a state. It's not a territory. Okay, so BLM, for example. BLM was originally authorized, the Bureau of Land Management is originally authorized to use the Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 power to dispose of lands. That's what the Bureau of Land Management was to do, was to dispose of it, get it into the hands of private citizens into the state. But what have they done? They've set up shop here. They've been here for over 100 years, acting as our land managers. They're not our land managers. We need to get them out and say, you have no jurisdiction here. Because once you get these federal agencies who say they have jurisdiction, then all of a sudden we have to obey whatever the federal government says. But that's unnatural for the federal government to be telling us in our own local communities what you'll do with your land, how you'll manage this, what you can and can't do. It's unnatural for a bureaucrat in D.C. to be doing that. Or even to have a field office here and say, oh, yeah, we work for the federal government. The federal government doesn't have any jurisdiction here. Okay? Very, very clearly. They're an uninvited guest, and they shouldn't be telling the state legislature what they should and shouldn't be doing, because we already have the rules that say the state legislature is in charge of what we should and shouldn't be doing. The last part I think is interesting here. It says, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular states. Well, what are the claims of the United States? Over the territories and the property belonging to them. But I like the last part. It says, or of any particular state. What's the claim of the state? To the state of Wyoming. Okay? Some people say, oh, it says right there that the United States has supremacy. No, it doesn't. It says that the United States has their claim, which is to territories and property belonging to them, and the states have their claim, which is to their state. There's a separation. There's a distinction between what is governed by who. Okay? That's an interesting one. Not a lot of people talk about it, but it's very, very powerful. And there's some movement right now within the western states to take back a lot of those federal lands because they're ours. They're not federal lands. Okay? Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 is another issue that talks about federal land. Okay, we're going to start out with the beginning. Congress shall have power to exercise exclusive legislation over such district, not exceeding 10 square miles, as may become the seat of the government of the United States. Okay, a 10 square mile seat of the government of the United States, what does that sound like? Washington, D.C. Okay, Congress has legitimate, and what they call it is exclusive legislation over D.C. Who's in charge of the rules in D.C.? Congress is, okay? 10 square miles. It's the seat of the federal government, the United States government. Now, it goes on to say, Congress shall have power to exercise authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay, so remember in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, it talked about other property of the United States. Well, here's other property of the United States. What does it say? Let's look at it. There's 3 conditions here. I love this. I don't know. It seems like the Constitution always has these lined out conditions. Here's the first one. Property must be purchased. Can the federal government just come in and take and set up shop and claim land because they're the federal government after all? Not according to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. They have to purchase that land. Second condition is it has to be at the consent of the state legislature. They can't just purchase whatever they want to. They can only purchase it if the state legislature says they can. And here's the kicker, here's the most important, is the third condition. For the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. There's only 5 reasons for which they can purchase, and the state will authorize them to own land and property within the state. It's for forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay? What about National Forest Service lands, or scenic byways, or wetlands, national grasslands? Those are illegitimate and unconstitutional federal land grabs. Okay? They're not legitimate within the Constitution. That being said, take a look at this slide. You see this map here in the 11 western states, 12 if you include Alaska, but look at the huge difference. This is depicting in red the federal lands that are owned within these states. Now, people throw around this term called equal footing a lot. Equal footing, that term doesn't come from the Constitution, but it does come from Article 5 of the Northwest Ordinance of 1789. It was one of those laws that were made in pursuance of the Constitution, like it's talked about in Article 6, and therefore became the supreme law of the land. It was within the proper role of government to pass this law. And the Equal Footing Clause specifically states, quote, such state shall be admitted by its delegates into the Congress of the United States on an equal footing with the original states in all respects whatever. Does it look like these Western 11 states were admitted on the same equal footing? To me, it looks like there might have been some bribery, coercion. You will let us form your state with claim to 84% of your land in Nevada or 43% of your land in Wyoming. So when you compare the 11 Western states with those in the Midwest and the East Coast, it doesn't seem that we have an equal footing with them with respect to land ownership. Think about the implication when it comes to, let's say, mineral royalties, right? If 43% of Wyoming land is tied up in federal lands, then Wyoming ends up paying the federal government royalties on the resources of the land that they, supposedly, the federal government owns. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Same with ranchers, right? Their role, the government's role, was to dispose of the land, a commitment they honored on all states east of us, but they have taken over 100 years to do so with the western states. What they did when they created all those lands east of us, they said, look, we're going to dispose of this territory. We're just going to have very minimal land ownership, just like the Constitution calls for. And yet when it came to the 11 western states with all these minerals and all these valuable things, they've kind of lagged on their commitment, 100 years in ticking. Oh no, we're not going to give the land over to the state. We're going to completely control it, which is contrary to what the Constitution calls for, because they're not supposed to own land except for specific purposes, and it's contrary to the own obligation they made to us that they were actually going to start using the Article 4 power to dispose of that land back to the states and to the people. Why would the founders set it up this way? It's really simple. Why have some distant bureaucracy trying to control land? The way to make land good and free and productive is to give it to the people who live on it and live around it and own it. Okay? That's how you do it. And if government is the one picking and choosing how it will be used and disposed, etc., then intentionally or not, they're picking winners and losers in the marketplace. And that's not right. It's not right for government to do something that we as individuals can't do. Can I as an individual say, you're a winner, you're a loser? You can do this with your land, you can't do that with your land. No, I can't do that. I can't use that force, so I can't delegate to government to use that force on my behalf. The same old scenario we keep talking about, right? These basic principles. So when we talked at the beginning about these principles from the Declaration and these basic concepts of property, hopefully you can see how they apply now. And you need to, I know that private property can get real sticky and real hairy. I know that. I know it can be very, well, gosh, that really hurts me and I don't like that. But that's why we have to look at it clearly with the principles that are held in the Constitution. And when you have a principle, you have a foundation from which to move forward on. Okay, so we've looked at some principles. We've looked at what the Constitution has to say. And now we're going to get to kind of a live, current issue that's been around for a while called Agenda 21. Okay? Agenda 21, what is it? How does it affect me? And what can I do about it? If you answer those three questions, then something becomes relevant to your life, right? Okay? So in simple terms, what is Agenda 21? Agenda 21 is environmentalism hijacked. Okay? All of us are environmentalists, right? We all want to be good stewards over the land. We don't want to destroy it. Okay? Environmentalism in and of itself is not bad. But when you hear environmentalism now, what do you think? That's bad. Environmentalists are bad because they're over the top and they don't understand true principles of freedom. They're trying to worship the earth instead of worship the creator of the earth, right? Okay? Now, it's important to understand, too, Agenda 21, that's a shortened name. It's the United Nations Agenda 21. When you tie Agenda 21 to the United Nations, it becomes very clear, something wrong with this, because if UN's involved with it, and they're talking about this world government idea, this one world order where they're controlling from the top, from their international areas, okay? Agenda 21, though, is the ultimate conspiracy theory, okay? You say Agenda 21 and people raise eyebrows like, whoa, that sounds weird. So what I want to do is I want to provide to you some facts. And I'm not going to try to tell you that Agenda 21 is bad, even though I just did. I'm going to let you make the decision by yourself and let the proponents of Agenda 21 tell you what they think about it. And then you can make your own decision whether you like it or not. Okay? So Agenda 21 was the byproduct of the Earth Summit. In 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, they had an Earth Summit. Thousands and thousands of local government officials, international government officials, media, thousands upon thousands showed up to this Earth Summit, okay? And they produced what was called Agenda 21. Now, they say they produced it there in the Earth Summit, but that's probably like the people who say we produced Obamacare in a 2-week period. No, it was written beforehand. It was worked on beforehand, but that's what came out of this Earth Summit. Now, this slide is going to show you What I'm going to try to do, like I said before, is get some original sources. I need to set up where these original sources are coming from. The first one is ICLEI. ICLEI was developed in 1990. ICLEI stood for International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Okay? International Council for Local Environment. International groups telling our local environmental issues what needs to happen. Okay? Now, in 2005, the directors of ICLEI said, you know what, people are onto this. They don't like the international control of local environmental initiatives. So we're going to change it. We're going to leave the name ICLEI, but it's no longer an acronym. It's just ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I. That's all it is. And the new subtitle is Local Governments for Sustainability. It's the same exact organization, but what do they do? Oh, it's Local Governments for Sustainability. Really? It's still the same organization with international controls. Okay? 1992, the Earth Summit, remember, it produced Agenda 21, this big, thick document of legalese. And who was our president in 1992? George Bush Sr., and he signed ceremonially. He couldn't sign this agreement into law. He signed it ceremonially to say, yeah, U.S. is on board with Agenda 21. So it's not a Democrat-Republican issue. Next, in 1993, this Agenda 21 was kind of made into a smaller, readable version by a man named Daniel Saitars. Okay, he's an extreme environmentalist lawyer. He wrote the book Agenda 21, and it was approved by the Agenda 21 supporters as a book that we can look into and understand what Agenda 21 is all about. Next one is the President's Council on Sustainable Development. That was developed in 1993 by President Clinton. Global Biodiversity Assessment, a tiny little book the UN put out in 1996. And then in 1998, 5 years after the first book that Daniel Saitars wrote, he wrote a book called Sustainable America. So these are our 6 sources. These are the sources I'm going to be using and quoting to you to say, here's what they think. These are the proponents of Agenda 21, right? I'm going to be going to them to say, look what they say. What do you think about that? Okay, here's the first one. Here's this Agenda 21 book that was written in 1993. Agenda 21 proposes, quote, an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. So what's the scope of Agenda 21? To have every single person on Earth do what they want them to do. That's the epitome of international control, right? Okay. Secondly, the United Nations Biodiversity Treaty. This is really sci-fi-ish, okay? Nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material, where humans are one strand of nature's web and all living creatures are considered equal. So the UN just helped you understand that you're on the same equal playing field as a mosquito or a zebra or an elephant or an amoeba, okay? We're just one living strand in that where creatures are considered equal. Therefore, the natural way is the right way, and human activities should be molded along nature's rhythms. Okay? Sound like something you agree with, you like? I hope not, or you're in the wrong room. Okay? Now, Agenda 21, this book also says, there are specific actions which are intended to be undertaken by multinational corporations and entrepreneurs, by financial institutions and individual investors, by high-tech companies and indigenous people, by workers and labor unions, by farmers and consumers, by students and schools, by governments and legislators, by scientists, by women, by children. In short, by every person on Earth. Are they dead serious? They're dead serious. They mean this to be a global governing agenda brought to us by the United Nations. Okay? ICLEI, remember what ICLEI was and is, depending on what name you want to use. Harvey Rubin is the vice chairman of ICLEI, and he says this, individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective. Now, as America formed, we just talked about this earlier, right? As America formed our foundations on individualism or collectivism? Individualism, right? The right of the individual. Okay? He says those individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective. Why? Because they know better than us how to save the planet. Now, Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong is a self-avowed communist. And remember, communism is this idea of to each according to their need, from each according to their... Oh, here it is. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Right? So it's kind of this equality idea. Well, Maurice Strong is a multi-millionaire communist. So communism's worked out pretty well for him. Okay? You talk about this equality. Oh, I guess some are more equal than others, right? I think that's what we understand. And that's one of the bases behind these ideas. These people are elitists. They say they know better. They're more in tune with altruistic values, and we just need to trust them, and they'll fix things. They have a plan, and we just need to get out of the way and follow their plan. Look what he says. Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. You can't do that. And I say, Maurice Strong, lead the way. Show us how to do this. Okay? It's not sustainable to live in suburban areas or to eat meat or to have air conditioning. Really. Now, that doesn't wind you up. Now, remember, Maurice Strong, just to make sure you know, he's the Secretary General of the 1992 UN Earth Summit. If there's one man who epitomizes and represents Agenda 21, it is Maurice Strong, the Secretary General of the UN Earth Summit. Now, he also is the founder of the UN Environment Program, and here's what he said. This is the one that should knock your socks off. Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? It's laughable, except that people, thousands of people rallied around this and said, that's true, that's true. Humans are bad, and industrialized civilizations have got to collapse, otherwise the world is going to fall apart. Really? Is that an absurd way to look at things? Yeah, you bet it is. It's a perverse way of looking at things. Now, they claim that these assertions rest on and hinge upon scientific evidence and facts. But recently, we found out that scientific evidence and facts don't exist. They're made up. There's within the United Nations, within the United States, groups and organizations that have fabricated or that have misinterpreted simple cycles of the earth that have been happening for thousands of years. Okay? So that kind of just blows away in the dust. Back to this book, Agenda 21. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Okay, there's going to be a whole new reorientation. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. The deployment of human and financial resources have always been governed by free markets. Well, should always be. In most countries it's not. But human and financial resources in America, once again, should be, maybe not as much as they should be, by supply and demand, by risk and reward, by the natural free market. They're saying, no, Agenda 21 needs to control those things. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Okay? Remember, these are their words, not mine. They're the ones who, in my mind, are digging their own hole. Okay? They're filling up their own grave here pretty quick. Property rights are not absolute and unchanging, but rather a complex, dynamic, and shifting relationship between two or more parties over space and time. That's from the UN again. Last time I checked, when I own private property, it's mine. It doesn't shift, it doesn't disappear, it doesn't reappear. It's simply mine. Right? Madison said, it's my private property. I do what I want to with it. Yeah, that's pretty simple. This sounds like Star Trek, sci-fi, right? Well, you never know. It could be shifting and changing and dynamic and complex. So the UN offers, all the way back in 1976, the UN on the Report of Habitat offers a solution. Here's what they say. Land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. What are the inefficiencies of the market? Inefficiencies in the market don't exist. That's why the market exists, is to eliminate those inefficiencies. Supply and demand, right? Price, risk, reward. It can't be subject to the inefficiencies and pressures of the market. Individuals can't own land. What they say is, private land ownership is also a principal instrument of the accumulation and concentration of wealth and therefore contributes to social injustice. So you've probably heard of social justice, right? Social justice is defined as the right and opportunity of all people to benefit equally from the resources afforded us by society and the environment. Therefore, private land, that's not fair because some people have it and some people don't. That's not just, okay? Social justice, what it really is a redistribution of wealth, taking from those who have and giving it to those who don't have. Okay, this equality, this false idea of equality. Okay? Everyone should own land collectively so that no one owns it individually. That's what they're saying. Last, to finish off this quote, if unchecked, it may become a major obstacle, it meaning private property, may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. And I say, you bet it will. My private property better get in the way of your development schemes because you're not planning about my property. It's my property. Okay? And yes, it will get in the way of this international idea, this agenda of what we want to do with land and where we want to push people and how we want to use it. Yeah, private property does get in the way of that. You bet it does. I agree 100%. Now, here's your picture of the Communist Manifesto, okay? The point I want to make is these are bad ideas, but they're not new ideas. Plank number 1 of the Communist Manifesto says abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public uses. To not let any land be private, make it all public. Okay, here's what Karl Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. The middle-class owner of property must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. UN Agenda 21 is just a canned version of communism that's been around for a long time. Remember? Communal ownership of land, what did it do to the Pilgrims? It nearly killed them. Okay? Communal ownership never gives freedom. Remember, private property and freedom are inseparable, according to Washington. These are true principles, and Marx knew them, and he was teaching the opposite of them. Okay? In Sustainable America, this book written in 1998 says there must be a major effort to stabilize the number of vehicle miles traveled per person. Why? Because vehicles pollute the earth, right? Santa Cruz, California, in their own local Agenda 21 plan, it says cars are not a sustainable mode of transportation. Now think about that. Is it about the cars? It has nothing to do with the cars. It has to do with control. Because if you can't move unless the government says you can, you are a slave. Okay? You can't have cars. You need to use the public transit system. Oh, and we can shut that down and control the schedules. And yeah, so you start to see the pattern here, right? And if you look at human beings as the enemy of the earth, then, yeah, we need to control them. We can't have them just do whatever they want to do. These human beings are out to destroy the earth. Well, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at human beings, okay? Also in this book, we must move towards stabilization of the U.S. population and reduced rate of population growth in the United States and the world. Okay? Population control, Agenda 21, you bet. Because people, men, are destroying the earth. We need to reduce the population growth. We need to have population control. We can get some other quotes that will knock your socks out, do they? We need to reduce it down to just a million, just 500,000. That's the only thing the earth can handle. Who's going to do that? The proponents of Agenda 21, how about they volunteer to do it? Oh, I'll be the first one to go in the name of the earth. Yeah, I'll do that to help the earth. Go for it. Step right up. Oh, no, it's not them. They're the elitist ones. They're the ones who know better. We can't kill them or take care of their population issues because they're the ones who know. Okay? We must also expand the number of curricula, materials, and training opportunities that teach the principles of sustainable development in our education systems. You bet. Is global warming in our education? Yeah. Is evolution in the education? Yeah, all these different things are in our education system to try to teach us that this isn't right, that our traditionally and fundamental principles that we founded our country are founded on, that's just old traditional stuff. That's not true. It's folklore. What we need is the new, improved version of an entire shift in the way we look at things and prioritize things in life. Okay. J. Gary Lawrence, he was the advisor on President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development. He said this: participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. Okay? There's a problem here, because if people realize it's attached to the UN, there's going to be conspiracy theorists saying, oh, it's a conspiracy, okay? He says, this segment of our society who fear one world government and a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedom would be stripped away would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So we got a problem on our hands. Agenda 21 being tied to the UN is going to bring up people who are conspiracy theorists. Okay? People who fear one world government. Anyone here fear one world government? I do. I don't want one world government. Okay? He says, here's our solution then. Here's what we need to do. So we call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. You heard of smart growth? Probably heard of that. Okay, it's out on everyone's lips. Because nobody wants dumb growth or irresponsible growth. They want smart growth, right? Let's just call it smart growth. Don't call it UN Agenda 21. J. Gary Lawrence is wise. He says, don't call it UN Agenda 21. Call it smart growth. Call it comprehensive planning. Call it growth management. Yeah, because that makes sense. We want to do that. Don't let people tie it to the UN because they'll realize this is an international program that's getting shoved down their throats. Okay, so here's the slide that I could have started with, but probably would have scared you away, okay? And now what I'm saying is they have developed what this is, and they're the ones who support this. What is Agenda 21? It's a worldwide United Nations program. Who does it intend to affect? Every person or group of people on Earth. Why? It's to save the planet through sustainability. Where? All across the planet in every locality, and that's the kicker, in every little locality. When? In the 21st century, that's why it's called Agenda 21. And how? Okay, here's the list. A major shift in priorities: collective rights dominating individual rights, private property limits, population control, equality among all living creatures, individual liberty restrictions, limits on miles driven, air conditioning use, etc. Now, if this had been the first slide I posted, you would have said, this is going to be a long day. This guy's got a lot of weird ideas. But those aren't my ideas. Those are their quotes. Those are their the proponents' supportive ideas of Agenda 21. Okay? So does a wacko idea, is it crazy? Yeah, it is. It's bad. It's evil. And how does it apply to private property? It's trying to control private property, take it out of the hands of private individuals and put it in the hands of government planners. Okay? This is one of my favorite slides. I spent a lot of time studying the United Nations, okay? And when it comes down to it, over and over, I come up with this conclusion. It's the United Nations versus God, period. The United Nations has published thousands and thousands of books and material and pamphlets and spent millions and billions of dollars trying to convince us of untruths, trying to convince us that what God said to Adam isn't true, okay? So in Genesis 1:28, God says to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." Okay? Do you believe in God? And He's the one who put the earth on or gave us this earth for our benefit to be used, and He makes us stewards over it. We will be held accountable to Him for how we treat the earth. Or do you believe in the UN, who says, we're the gods of the earth, we're in charge, you'll do what we say, because the earth can only be sustained if we do all these things we just talked about, population control, etc., etc. No cars, no moving, no eating, no breathing, okay? All these things. You either put your trust and confidence in God or your trust and confidence in the UN. All right, so now we progress to this idea of good intentions, right? Here's a slide. It says, we should try to save the planet, shouldn't we? Yeah. Shouldn't we be wise stewards over the earth's limited resources? You bet. What about the plants, animals, lakes, and streams? Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to stand up for them? And so the proponents of Agenda 21 say, well, we're going to do that. We're the ones who have the plan to fix this and to capitalize on these good intentions. There's a quote that I like. It's becoming quickly one of my very favorites by Daniel Webster that says this: "It's hardly too strong to say that the Constitution is made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions." Okay, so good intentions can really throw people off. Well, it's a good intention, therefore government should do it. Well, Daniel Webster says, and it's true, that the Constitution is made to guard us against the dangers of good intentions. When they pull at our heartstrings and try to teach us, oh, this is a good thing to do, the issue isn't whether it's good or not. Okay, he goes on with this quote. "There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters." Okay, so the bar the Constitution sets isn't whether something is good or not. The bar it sets is whether it's right or not for government to do it. That's a huge and important point to make. There's a big difference there. Okay? This is an interesting quote that I think has Agenda 21 written all over it. It says, "Most of the major ills of the world have been caused by well-meaning people who ignored the principle of individual freedom except as applied to themselves, and who are obsessed with fanatical zeal to improve the lot of mankind in the mass through some pet formula of their own. The harm done by ordinary criminals, murderers, gangsters, and thieves is negligible in comparison with the agony inflicted upon human beings by the professional do-gooders who attempt to set themselves up as gods on earth, and who ruthlessly force their views on all others with the abiding assurance that the end justifies the means." Okay? We're talking about these professional do-gooders, these people who have a fanatical zeal to fix things, the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Mao Zedongs. When we're talking about a negligible comparison, in the 20th century alone, there were 170 million people killed by their own government, not in wars, by their own government, by these professional do-gooders who attempt to set themselves up as gods on earth. Okay? People who with, who knows, good or bad intentions, but who intend to rule and be masters. Agenda 21 says we have good intentions to save the planet, but our intentions are to rule. Okay? And so it's not a matter of, was it good to save the planet? Yes, it is. And the best way to do that is for people. Governments don't have hearts. They don't have feelings and emotions. Government, only people have those feelings, emotions, those desires. People can effectuate that change. Government uses that power and abuses it. Okay? Here's an interesting quote. It may be a little bit of a stretch. I like the application here. You have to decide yourself if you agree. Alexander Hamilton says, "Has it been found that bodies of men act with more rectitude or greater selflessness than in individuals?" He's saying, do we tend to act better in groups or as individuals? Okay, he goes on. "Regard to reputation has a less active influence when the infamy of a bad action is to be divided among a number than when it is to fall singly upon one." Okay, so in high school, your friends say, hey, we're going to go throw pumpkins at mailboxes. You're like, well, if we're all doing it, no big deal. Would you ever do that as an individual? No, because if you got caught, you'd have some problems, right? If you get caught with 20 other of your friends, well, you just kind of spread the infamy of that bad decision. Okay, that's what Hamilton's talking about. And the way I apply this to Agenda 21 is sometimes we think, boy, do we act better? Are we better stewards of the land collectively? Or do we act with more responsibility and duty individually Okay? The question isn't whether we want to protect the environment. The question is how to best protect it. You put it into my private hands and I will protect my property. I have every natural incentive in the world to make sure that it's not damaged, to make sure it's not abused now or in the future, that it maintains its value. And I have a built-in incentive to take care of it. Whereas if you say, oh no, we can't trust people to take care of it, we need to give it to the central government. Only they can be trusted. Only they have the statistics and the reports and the studies. Well, guess what? That violates the true principle of freedom. To have someone at a distant level, collectively, they're going to fix this. Collectively, the person who's taking care of the land is a paid employee of the federal government who just says, well, it's my job. But if it's my private property, you better believe I'm going to treat the land right. Okay? Private property, ownership of private property is a natural law. It doesn't need other explanation. The way to fix the environment, the way to take care of the environment is get the property in the hands of the people who naturally care for it and will be good stewards over their own land. That private property is a direct reflection of me, and I don't need a government mandate or a threat by an international body or an agenda by the UN to tell me how to treat it. I'll treat it how I want to treat it, which is in the best interest of me and the earth itself. Okay, natural law. But the question that a lot of people ask is, well, yeah, but Jeff, what if you have a industry who's polluting the earth, polluting the water, polluting the air? That's entirely within the proper role of government. 2, if any individual is harmed, their health, their life, their liberty is harmed by that, then they can seek redress in a court of law. And that law will inflict punishments upon the offender. Okay? But to preempt and say, we're in charge of this, we're in charge of that, you can't do this, you can't do that, to preempt that and to restrict freedom is to overstep the proper bounds of government. Government is supposed to protect. Now, are there certain standards we need to upheld? Yes. But when they go over into to suppressing the freedom of the individual, that's when it gets overbearing. James Madison, there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Gradual and silent, little by little. Okay, because if the UN came marching in like this with their blue berets and they said, hey, we're going to take over, what would we do? We'd reject them immediately. We'd see it for what it is. And yet when we have these gradual and silent programs through Agenda 21, we accept them little by little. Well, that makes sense. That should be good. That's a good idea. Okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'd love to have that grant, or we'd love to comply with this program. All the while not realizing that gradually and silently our freedoms are being taken away from us. Okay? So that's the big long answer to what is Agenda 21. The second question was, how does Agenda 21 affect me? I guess I would say, if you don't mind the government telling you at either the national or international level or any level how many kids you can have, how many miles you can drive, whether you can use air conditioning, what you can eat, where you can live, then Agenda 21 doesn't affect you. Don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. Okay, but if that does bug you, then there is no way that Agenda 21 doesn't affect you. So those advocates of Agenda 21 say, look, relax. If you don't want to be part of this movement, don't worry about it. We're not making you. Okay, let's look at some of the quotes we looked at earlier. This word here is intended. It's highlighted. They're saying we just have good intentions. Remember we talked about intentions before? We just have good intentions. If you don't want to join us in our intentions, don't worry about it. Once again, intended in the other quote we had. A major effort. This is just a major effort, and we're all working together. If you don't want to be on board, no sweat. We're moving toward these goals. Okay? So it's just kind of a soft, feel good, we're all working together on this thing. But George Washington, we already looked at this quote earlier. He calls him on the carpet and says, look, government is not reason, it's not eloquence, government is force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant, a fearful master. So those who say, oh, don't worry, this is just we're all working together and participating in good intentions. No, if the government is involved with it, government is force. And so there's force involved in this agenda, this radical environmentalism. So we look at these quotes again and say, oh wait, look at that word require. Does that sound like soft law, or does that sound like hard, enforceable law? Later on, demand, require, demand. Are those soft words? No, those are you will do, right? And at the very bottom, the essence of the problem here is that the UN is the one in charge. Because the UN, we talked about this in the very first presentation, they say rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. They say rights come from them. Our declaration says rights come from God. Okay? And they say we control your freedom. We control what you do. And God says, I've given you freedom to choose. Diametrically opposed, diabolically opposed, right? To understand that is to understand the root of the problem, is they want to force with their version of what government is and who gives rights, instead of respecting individuals who can make the choice for freedom and a natural choice that will protect the environment. Supremacy Clause, this Constitution and the laws of the United States that shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay? So not only does the UN not give us our rights, and they're not the ones who control our freedoms, the governing document of our land is, according to the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution. No international authority, international agenda is the supreme law. There's no more supremacy beyond the Constitution. It's the supreme law of our land. UN Agenda 21 violates that. Now, a lot of people say, that's unconstitutional. This is constitutional. And one of my pet peeves is when they just say that and leave it as is. Well, if it is unconstitutional, or if it is constitutional, show me where. Okay? My claim is that UN Agenda 21 is unconstitutional. And the reason I claim that is because of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. Here's what it says. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with a foreign power. Okay? Is the United Nations a foreign power? Yes. Is UN Agenda 21 a compact? It is. So therefore, it is contrary to the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. Article 6 finishes by saying, all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay? So some people may argue, well, UN Agenda 21 is like a treaty. It's an international agreement, and this clearly states, and the Supremacy Clause has to be made under the authority of the United States. So when Agenda 21 comes in and says, we're the supreme authority, we're going to mandate, we're in charge of saying how the environment will be fixed, then that violates the Constitution as well. Now, some people say, well, what if we agree to it? What if we willingly agree to it? It doesn't matter if you willingly agree to it. It's still contrary to the principles of the Constitution that some international body would control, or that we would adopt international rules that have effect and control over the freedoms, because they're not elected by us. They're not accountable to us. The only people who are elected by us and accountable to us are our congressmen, right? The people that we've, through our system of government, given the power to make decisions on our behalf, not the UN to make decisions on our behalf. In questions of power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution is meant to bind government, and it's written very explicitly and clearly for our own United States and the government within our states themselves. It's explicitly written, and it's there to bind those good intentions, those people who are the professional do-gooders. And if we look above and beyond the Constitution, we're in trouble, aren't we? Okay? So that's how does it affect me? Lastly, what can I do about Agenda 21? Here's some of the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, to understand how this UN international thing ends up affecting me in my local community. Okay? Here are the things that I think are important to know. Know the organizations. Okay? You need to know that. You need to know their game plan. You need to know their terminology. You need to know their tactics. And lastly, you need to get to know your public servants and educate them. Okay? That's what you can do about Agenda 21. Let's go through each one of these. I'm going to give you some specific examples, and probably more than you want to know, but at least something you can work with and kind of pursue on your own if you like. As far as knowing the organizations, the different levels of government, right, that are involved in or could be involved in Agenda 21. At the federal level, you have EPA, HUD, DOT, okay, so Environmental Protection Agency, Housing and Urban Development, and Department of Transportation. Those three recently have hooked up and have aligned to create the Sustainable Communities Initiative. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. President's Council on Sustainable Development, the White House Rural Council, American Planning Association, USDA, Rural Development, and non-governmental organizations. At the federal level, those are some of the culprits, not all of them, but some of the culprits that are getting involved and pushing and promoting UN Agenda 21 ideas. Okay, so that's the federal level. At the state level, and I don't get too excited, I'm not saying these people or anyone who works for them are bad or for Agenda 21. I'm saying these are the types of organizations that exist through which Agenda 21 can manifest itself. Okay, state level, Wyoming Business Council, the Wyoming Rural Development Council, WYOPAS. Okay, those are some typical maybe state agencies and functions. Locally, you have metropolitan planning organizations. Those are for any city with 50,000 or more. Economic development boards, joint powers boards, Wyoming Community Network, Rural Resource Guide, public-private partnerships, city and town planners, county commissions, city councils, city-county administrators, planning and zoning. Okay, why are those at the local level? Is someone who works for planning and zoning a bad person? No, I'm saying those are the targets through which, that's the means through which Agenda 21 gets introduced, because those are the ones who have the power at the local level to impose these zoning laws, etc., that we've already talked about earlier. Okay. So city councils, planning and zoning, county commissioners, they're the target of Agenda 21. All right? They're, in many cases, they're the victim, not the enemy. Okay, they're simply doing what they think is best. If we have a federal grant or an international grant or, whoa, yeah, let's do it. All right, supposed to bring money to my community, my city? Shouldn't we have plans for this? Shouldn't we have a vision? Okay, all these different things. What happens is they've bought into the fuzzy, feel-good dialogue of those who want and need government authority to implement their plans and infringe on private property rights. They're not the enemy. Those who are deceiving them and your community are the enemy. It says right here, those who want and need government authority. Grants that come from the government, they always are tied to a governmental entity. Okay? So watch out for the non-governmental organizations, for the helpful agencies, etc., that are trying to help get you grants. Well, why are they doing that? Because there's money attached, and they get some of the piece of the pie. Okay? So we have to look at that. Okay, know the game plan. Here's in general how the game plan works. The private market controls property valuation, ownership, and use. Okay? That's just natural. Natural law. Government offers a better solution to the private market with nice sounding objectives. Hey, we can fix the problems with the free market. Well, anyone who's trying to fix the problems of the free market, beware, okay? They're looking for control and power over freedom. Now, all stakeholders, quote unquote, meet to determine the new comprehensive government plan. Unfortunately, sometimes the only stakeholders that show up are those who are going to benefit from this new comprehensive plan, okay? Plans are mandated with the force of law, because why else does government meet if they're not going to use the force of law to mandate these? And next thing you know, voila, private property rights are subject to the new plan. Okay, in general, that's how it works. There's a problem with that, isn't there? In simple terms, the game plan is money. That's what the game plan is. Okay, so be aware when in city council meetings or county commission meetings and they're revolving around money, that we need to watch out. What are they wanting? That money always comes with strings attached, period. The thing that I think is interesting about the money, the dangling of money, is in case anyone hasn't recognized, we're $17 trillion in the hole. There is no money. And when people say, well, we've got to take it. If we don't take it, someone else is going to take it. The problem is it isn't there. It's illusionary. There is no money. There are strings attached. The only way to get more money is to tax us more. So they're saying, yeah, I'll take it. And taxes or borrowing from other countries, it ruins our economy to do that. And so that there's a false sense that, well, I can take this. It's there anyway. It's been granted. Someone's got to take it. That's the challenge, isn't it? Here's a general idea, okay? Now this is an idea, and this is a general concept. I'm not saying the people that this exact progression has happened, okay? So don't get wound up if I talk about your favorite local or state organization. I'm not attacking. But remember, there are no local plans, okay? In Agenda 21, they're all coming from the top. Okay, here we go. The President's Council on Sustainable Development, hypothetically, recommends a process and regulatory framework for a federally funded initiative like comprehensive plans. President's Council on Sustainable Development says, hey, we need to have comprehensive plans in the local communities. We're going to put forth a process and some regulations to make sure that does get down to the local communities. The USDA offers Rural Community Development Initiative grants in order to develop those comprehensive plans. So now there's money tied. It's open. There's some grants available, okay? So the Wyoming Rural Development Council says, hey, there's some money. USDA has some money out there in this rural community development grants, and they organize resources to acquire the federal money. And they go out and start talking to the different county commissions, etc., and say, hey, guys, there's money there. Did you know? Here's what we need to do to get it, okay? And NGOs, non-governmental organizations like WyoPass, work with the WRDC, the Wyoming Rural Development Council, to organize visioning meetings. They say, okay, here's the first step. We're going to pull together a visioning meeting so we can get our comprehensive plan together, okay? Now, once again, remember, I'm not talking bad about WyoPass or bad about Wyoming Rural Development Council. These are the types of organizations, the types of things that could happen, okay? Now, in this vision meeting, stakeholders, oftentimes pre-selected stakeholders, right, show up at the visioning meeting, are led to a predetermined consensus, and a comprehensive plan is developed, and the grant money is secured. And in that process, what happens? Private property rights are destroyed because the visioning is the visioning of your private property. The comprehensive plan is the plan for the apartment complex you own downtown that now doesn't meet code because they changed it. Okay? You see how that works? It's destructive. It comes top down. And like I said, a lot of these I'm aware of visioning meetings have happened where the contractor who stands to gain by changing the code for the apartment complex downtown that's going to get demolished now because it doesn't meet spec, the contractor ends up coming in later and buying that for a good price and putting his own apartment building in. He happens to be at the visioning meeting, the comprehensive planning meeting. Really? Yes. What about the average citizen? Well, they claim, they advertise it, they claim that people knew about it, but no one did. people who show up are people who have some skin in the game, are going to stand to gain in these processes. Okay, so that's the game plan. That's an idea. Now know the terminology. There's a bunch of words: smart growth, sustainable development, wildlands projects, scenic byways, comprehensive planning, growth management, visioning, regionalizing, walkable, bikeable, consensus, sprawl, communitarianism, open space, federal grants, rewilding. These are buzzwords that are associated with Agenda 21. Does that mean anyone who uses this word or thinks that any of these words are good are Agenda 21 insiders? No. But these are words you need to be aware of. They show up in your documents. These are the words that show up all kinds of places within the documents of comprehensive plans and new zoning codes, etc. When you see these, it should ring a bell and it should alert you to something you might want to look into. That's something maybe tied to Agenda 21. Okay? Just like Mr. Gary Lawrence suggested in one of these earlier slides, you got to change the name. If walkable, that's, oh, good, yeah, people, we want to do that. We want to have more local communities and more feel-good communities. But if it's tied to Agenda 21 purposes, which you may find it is, then we need to look at it more seriously and not just accept it for this word that's acceptable. We need to look at Agenda 21 and what's behind that, okay? Not because you're a conspiracy theorist, because you're a conspiracy factualist. There are people who are supporting Agenda 21 who want to destroy our private property rights. We've already established that. And we need to make sure to be aware, to go in with eyes wide open, not half closed and say, oh, it's all right, we don't need to worry about it. I trust whomever in government. And, speaking of terminology, let's look at the words agenda and conspiracy. They're both for a certain purpose. There's a defined purpose, a reason they're doing something. Conspiracy is something that's done in secret, and an agenda is something that's wide open. Okay? So Agenda 21 is wide open. They're saying they're trying to save the planet. But what is it that's hidden about it? They're trying to save the planet through destruction of private property rights. Okay? It's about control. It's not about the environment. So know the organizations, know their game plan, know the terminology now, know their tactics. This gets kind of interesting now, the specifics of what they actually do. This first tactic is called the Delphi technique. The Delphi technique essentially is arriving at a predetermined outcome that you believe you came up with on your own. Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. I was in Casper. I got a survey from Casper City and saying, hey, we want to hear your opinion about Casper. And the survey said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the walkability in Casper? And I thought, oh, and they might have asked the wrong person. Okay, because when I first saw walkable, I thought, what does that mean? Well, we're finding now in Casper the last couple of years, what they've been doing is they've been doing just that. They've been taking away storefront property and imposing on private property owners in order to put their beautification projects in, their walking paths in, etc. But the question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate walkability? And let's say I and every other citizen in Casper says, we rate it as a 1. Then the city manager can go back and say, look, the citizens have spoken. They want more walkability. They're all saying it's a 1. Okay? What if I say 10, it's great? Then what can they say? Good, we keep moving forward. They're liking it. They're liking what we're doing. We're moving forward on this walkability. Okay, so it's a predetermined outcome. It's a Delphi technique. It's control. It looks like you're participating and you're contributing the information, but it's already a predetermined outcome, and they can mold it and massage it in order to answer the way they want it to be answered, so justify their position. Secondly, visioning, making decisions collectively about how private property will and will not be used in the future. Is there any problem with the visions for my property? I have visions for my property. I have plans. Is there anything wrong with that? No. But what's wrong is when collectively a group of people or citizens or government are making visionary plans for my property. Wait a second. You're planning for my property? You're visioning my property? That's a violation of principle. It's private property. It's not your property. It doesn't go into your plans. Okay? Thirdly, regionalizing. This is losing local sovereignty to unelected officials and special interest groups. Okay? So instead of having local, accountable, elected public servants making decisions, in the name of being more efficient or more global or more community-oriented or county-oriented, start to have the regionalizing of boards, the regionalizing of decision makers, the centralization. And it gets further and further away from the people themselves. And the people are the ones who have the power in the first place. And the government servants should be accountable to the people. Okay, so regionalizing is a bad tactic. Grant money, we don't really need to go into this, I don't think, but in short, this for that, right? Give you this money if you do this. It's dangerous. Always comes with strings attached. There is no money. It's a false illusion that we can just print more and go up to 18 trillion in debt, right? We got to think through what's going on. Just because the money's there, we shouldn't be taking it. What's the proper role of government? Is government supposed to manage, be a fund investment manager and take care of invest our money certain ways and get a better profit on it. No, they're supposed to exist to use the money and as little as possible to protect our rights. That's it. Not to say, well, let's just do this and do that. No. Hold on. I'll do that. I can plan. I can invest my money. Don't invest it for me. Don't say, well, this would be good for the tax base, etc., etc. Precautionary principle. Okay, this is legalese. If there is a suspected risk to the environment, in the absence of consensus as to its likelihood or impact, the burden of proof falls on the party implementing the action. You must prove a negative. I brought this up in Laramie. And interestingly, they raised their hands. Hey, that's happening right here. There are about 50 homes outside of town that the precautionary principle had been applied on. Okay, an environmentalist came in and said, hey, you're polluting the aquifer below this portion of land. And the people said, no, we're not. They said, yeah, with your septic tanks, you are. So the people got together and hired a geological engineer to prove, look, it's not. But guess what? There wasn't consensus because that environmentalist had other people who were saying, no, it is. So you have this, yes, it's happening, no, it's not happening. The precautionary principle says, well, the burden of proof is on the people who own those septic tanks to prove and bring to a consensus that it's not happening. And in the meantime, we're going to be cautious and we're going to disallow them to use their septic tanks. So did the government take away from them their land? No, they still have the deed. They can still live there, right? Or can they? They can't use their septic tanks. Did they take away the land from them? Yes, you bet they did, because they took away the use of the land. And now the value of that land, when they go to sell it, who's going to buy it? People can't live there anymore. They can't use it for what they want to use it for. And so the government has stripped from them their property in many different forms, right? The value, the use. Okay, the precautionary principle is very dangerous. Watch out. It may sound logical. We need to be cautious just in case. Yeah, but it's not about, remember, it's not about the environment. It's not about the land. It's about control. What happens to these people who live outside in suburban areas, this unsustainable area to live? They're forced eventually to move closer into the urban areas to consolidate, okay? Consensus. Who here is in support of protecting our clean water? Everyone is, right? Honestly, yeah, we're all going to raise our hands and say, yeah, I'm in support of clean water. So I'm the city administrator. I go back to the city council the next day and say, hey, look, I have a list of 55 names. They're all in support of clean water and the regulations that go with it. Wait a second. That's not consent. You didn't ask us that, right? That's happened. That may sound like, oh, come on, that doesn't happen. I've seen it happen 3 or 4 times personally in my own life. That's what happens. Consensus. Oh, they all agree with this. Or we've surveyed or we've taken it. Well, yeah, but how was the question asked? What were the implications? Those weren't quite clearly explained. Of course, everyone wants clean water, but the government says, and of course, the only way to do that is through government intervention. The private citizens, there might be better ways. It may not be just taxing and spending and building. It may be we can do this more efficiently. Okay, the private market usually has it better figured out than the government. No other tactics. Public-private partnerships and non-governmental organizations is a huge deal. Okay, it's basically using taxpayer money to finance a joint venture between the government and private industry. Maybe I'll try to just make a synopsis of this. Basically, government exists, like I said earlier, to protect our rights and do so with as little money as possible and with as little resources as possible. Okay, that's their goal. It's not a profit incentive. It is a protect your rights and an efficiency incentive. Whereas on the other hand, the private market, their goal is to make as much money as possible. It's a profit incentive. Okay, that's their whole job. Now, government is hired by people to protect their rights. The private industry is hired by people to do whatever they want them to do, meet their needs, their wants, their desires. Okay, when you mix the two in private-public partnerships, there's a challenge because you mix the force and power of government with a monopoly on the money of the taxes, with the profit incentive of those who are wanting to help the government and engage in this partnership, and the formula creates the perfect corruption formula. Okay, power of government, the profit motive of the private enterprise, and you move forward. And in the name of, we want to be more efficient, no, government has its role, and the private has its role. When you mix those together, you get corruption. Lastly, control sprawl. Okay, this is a big buzzword. Keeping citizens from living outside of urban areas under the guise of protecting the environment. Okay, we can't let them live out there. Why? Because it's control. If you get them in an urban environment, what do urban environments, what do they rely on? They rely on everything they have. Their sustenance comes from government. Their power, their communication, their transportation, their heat, their whatever. And there's control. It's way easier to control 20,000 people in an apartment complex than it is 20,000 people spread across the the land, living on the land, who are independent. They have their own food. They have their own water supply. They have their own sources of energy. Wait, the government can't quite handle that. That's not a good idea, according to Agenda 21, right? And it's under the guise of protecting the environment. We don't want those guys out in the country polluting the environment. Remember, God gave the earth to people to use to their benefit. Government's trying to say, no, we can't use that earth. We have to restrict it. But this is definitely their agenda, okay? Jefferson says this: when we get piled upon one another in large cities, as in Europe, we shall become as corrupt as Europe. That's true. That's what happens, okay? I'm not saying anything against people who live in cities. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we should be free to choose to live where we want to live. And when the government tries to push us into metropolitan urban areas through their tactics, through their laws, through their rules, through their zoning, it's something that's intentional and has legitimate consequences. It's not something just, oh well, whatever. It is a big deal. Okay, the last step here is to get to know your public servants and educate them. First and foremost, build a relationship of trust. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, right? Don't attack them. Don't go in there saying, you're for Agenda 21, this is bad, and you're doing this. We need to talk with them, try to understand and communicate with them. Listen to them. Okay, build that relationship. If you get that relationship and they trust you, ask for permission to maybe speak at the board or the council meeting, okay? Hand out DVDs or pamphlets or books. Try to share information with them. Try to educate them and share it. Don't shake, don't force, just share it with them. I think they'll see, the people who are in those positions of power, once they start to see the principle, they start to say, that's right. There are strings that have been attached that we're kind of stuck now, and looking back, I wish we'd never done that. Yeah. Okay, so you work on it. Talk to them about Agenda 20 and help them to see that. Share with them some of the quotes that are in the presentation. Share with them some of your ideas. Talk about common beliefs. Start where you believe. Hey, do you like the government taking from you this, etc., etc.? Okay, and go from there. So there are 1,000 hacking of the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. It's really, really important that we get together and work on this. Agenda 21 is very organized, internationally, nationally, locally. It's very organized and it's very effective. What we need to do is organize so we can strike at the root. And lastly, duties are ours, results are God's. It's quite easy to say, this is overwhelming. It is. Yeah. Just like any other area, though. Whether it's property rights or power or money or economics or Supreme Court or executive orders, all those things are overwhelming. It can seem like, oh man, it's too much. Well, it is too much for us. We're not going to win this battle. God's going to win it. And what we need to do is to do our part. When we do our part, we can rest assured that we're on the winning side because God's going to win. The only question is, am I going to be on his side?